SITREP World Briefing for June 22, 2026. The United States and Iran opened direct negotiations in Switzerland and agreed to continue lower-level technical talks after a first round that both sides cast as a step toward containing two linked crises, regional fighting centered on Lebanon and a new confrontation over the Strait of Hormuz. The opening session matters because direct U.S.-Iran contacts are rare and because any breakdown could quickly spill from battlefield diplomacy into energy security and maritime risk across the Gulf. The negotiations were driven in part by Tehran's claim that it had closed the Strait of Hormuz on security grounds, a move that would threaten one of the world's most important oil shipping lanes and raise the risk of direct confrontation with the United States and Gulf states. Washington and Tehran have long treated the strait as a red line because a disruption there can affect global energy prices, naval deployments, and insurance costs within hours. By pairing discussion of the Lebanon ceasefire with technical talks on maritime tensions, the two governments signaled that they see the military and economic tracks as inseparable. The decision to keep technical teams engaged suggests neither side expects a quick political bargain, but it does create a mechanism for managing escalation while the ceasefire clock runs. Switzerland has often served as neutral ground for sensitive exchanges involving Iran and the United States, and this round followed the same pattern of indirect support from third-country mediators and narrowly defined objectives. What is at stake now is not only whether the 60-day truce around Lebanon can survive its first week, but also whether shipping through Hormuz can avoid becoming the trigger for a wider regional crisis involving Israel, Iran, the United States, and Arab Gulf states. Keir Starmer announced on June 22 that he was resigning as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, opening another leadership transition at the top of British politics. In London, Starmer also said a new Labour leader should be in place by the time Parliament returns in September, giving the governing party only a short window to organise a replacement after his departure. The resignation comes less than 2 years after Labour returned to power and shifts attention to how the party will manage government while selecting a successor. Starmer's decision followed mounting political pressure inside Labour, with multiple reports describing a decline in his standing after months of criticism over his handling of the economy and a broader loss of public support. That pressure intensified after a setback tied to Andy Burnham, a prominent Labour rival who emerged from a critical contest as a central figure in the debate over the party's direction. By stepping down now, Starmer acknowledged that colleagues wanted a fresh leader to rebuild support before the next national election. The announcement sets Britain on course to install its 7th Prime Minister in a little more than a decade. In Westminster, the next contest will matter not only for Labour's internal balance, but also for the government's credibility on growth, public services, and Britain's international positioning at a time when European security and global trade tensions are reshaping domestic politics. Starmer's exit becomes a test of whether Labour can replace its leader quickly and project stability from Downing Street after another change at the top. Abelardo de la Espriella won Colombia's presidential election on June 22 after a razor-thin runoff that initial results showed had put the Trump-backed political outsider ahead of left-wing rival Iván Cepeda. The result marked a major upset in one of Latin America's most strategically important democracies, where presidential races often turn on security, corruption, and the handling of relations with Washington. De la Espriella, a lawyer and businessman with a confrontational political style, secured the presidency by a narrow margin that highlighted how divided the electorate remains after a hard-fought campaign. The closeness of the count ensured that de la Espriella's victory was greeted with both celebration and scrutiny, with Cepeda saying the preliminary tally was not yet official or binding. The outcome points to a turn in Colombia's national politics because voters chose a candidate identified as an outsider and associated with Donald Trump at a moment when the country faces concerns over public security, state authority, and economic confidence. For Colombia, the hemisphere's fourth-largest economy and a long-standing U.S. partner, the next question is how quickly the president-elect can convert a narrow electoral mandate into a workable governing coalition. U.S. and Iranian negotiators concluded an initial round of talks in Switzerland, with mediators describing encouraging early progress, after the two sides began meeting on Sunday to build on an interim agreement reached last week. That earlier understanding included a commitment to reach a final deal within 60 days, giving the diplomacy both a deadline and higher stakes. The opening phase was described as strained and uneven, but it nonetheless produced enough movement for mediators to signal that the process had advanced beyond a purely symbolic encounter between governments whose direct relations have been hostile for decades. Negotiators entered a tougher second phase in Switzerland, where mediators said the sides made progress on arrangements aimed at keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and helping end the fighting in Lebanon. Those two files matter far beyond the room. Hormuz is one of the world's most important energy choke points, and Lebanon's conflict has become a wider regional test of whether U.S.-Iran diplomacy can reduce escalation through concrete steps rather than declarations alone. Sources and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.